Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Ricky Wassenaar. First, I'll look at the background of this case, including the timeline of the crimes, then move to my analysis. Ricky Kurt Wassenaar was born on April 20, 1963, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. On July 11, 1986, he committed armed robbery and aggravated assault in Arizona. In 1987, he was sentenced to 16 years in prison. In January 1997, Ricky was released from prison and placed on house arrest. One thing was for certain: Ricky had learned his lesson. He was never going to commit armed robbery or aggravated assault ever again. On February 5, 1997, Ricky committed armed robbery and aggravated assault. His target was an adult video store in Tucson. This was just 35 days after being placed on house arrest. In August of that year, Ricky was sentenced to 28 years in prison. He was sent to the Lewis complex of the Arizona Department of Corrections in Buckeye, Arizona. This is about an hour west of Phoenix. In this prison complex, Ricky was housed in the Maury unit along with about 800 other inmates. The buildings in this unit were positioned around a guard tower. Ricky was a member of the kitchen work crew. An acquaintance of his, Stephen Coy, also worked on this crew. Stephen was serving a life sentence for a 1993 armed robbery. On January 18, 2004, at 2:30 a.m., 19 members of the inmate kitchen work crew at the Maury unit, including Ricky and Stephen, were released from their housing units so they could report to the kitchen. A correctional officer named Kenneth Martin was working in the kitchen along with a female civilian employee. Armed with a shank, Ricky approached Kenneth and said, "This is an escape. I've got nothing to lose." Ricky took Kenneth's uniform and handcuffed him. He put the uniform on and shaved off his beard with an electric razor. Using electrical wire, Stephen restrained the female civilian employee. Ricky invited other inmates to join him in his escape attempt, but they declined his generous offer. At 4:15 a.m., Ricky left the kitchen carrying a 30-inch metal stirring paddle, which has been described as a giant spatula. After exiting into the red yard on the south side of the unit, Ricky approached the red yard gate near the 20-foot guard tower. The tower was occupied by two correctional officers, Jason Auk and Lois Fraley. Believing that Ricky was Officer Kenneth Martin, Jason remotely opened the gate and the tower door. When Ricky entered the tower, he kept his head down and made his way up the stairs. Jason was waiting at the top of the stairs, ready to greet who he believed was Kenneth. Just as Jason realized that Ricky was an imposter, Ricky struck him in the face with the stirring paddle. Stunned by the savage, supersized spatula strike, Jason was swiftly subdued. Right after this, Ricky encountered the other officer, Lois. He slammed his knee into her head, incapacitating her. Ricky handcuffed both officers. As this was happening, Ricky's accomplice, Stephen, remained in the kitchen. Stephen decided it was time to join Ricky. As he was making his way to the guard tower, he encountered an officer in the dining hall. Stephen slashed him in the face with a shank. Once he exited the dining hall and approached the tower, other guards tried to stop him. Using a rifle that he obtained from inside the tower, Ricky shot at these officers, which caused them to run for cover. This cleared the way for Stephen to enter the tower. At this point, all the staff at the prison had been alerted to the escape attempt, so Ricky and Stephen were trapped in the tower. There was nowhere they could go without being shot to death. During the standoff that followed, both Ricky and Stephen committed an assault of a sexual nature against Lois Fraley. On January 24, 6 days into the standoff, they released Jason in exchange for food. He was treated at a hospital and released after a week. On February 1, 2004, Ricky and Stephen released Lois and surrendered. This was the longest standoff in U.S. history. Stephen Coy pleaded guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to 7 terms of life in prison. He was sent to the state of Maine to serve his time. Ricky went to trial in March 2005. In an unwise move, he decided to represent himself, saying, "Nobody can represent me like me." Ricky claimed the charges against him were fictitious, and he wanted to shine a light on the prison system and its defects. one major complaint was how the prison did nothing to reform inmates. Ricky said, quote, "If I can find a jury with a backbone, I'll be acquitted of everything," unquote. Unfortunately for Ricky, no backbone-toting citizens made it past jury selection. On May 4, 2005, he was convicted of 10 counts of dangerous or deadly assault by a prisoner, 5 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count each of promoting prison contraband, first-degree escape, sexual assault, and aggravated assault. Ricky was sentenced to 16 consecutive terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 37 years. Initially, he was sent out of state and served time in a few different prisons, but in May 2018, Ricky was returned to Arizona. His new home was the Rehabilitation and Reentry Facility in Tucson, the largest prison in Arizona. In November 2024, Ricky's cellmate, 81-year-old Joseph DeSisto, died from various medical conditions. He had been serving a life sentence for offending against a minor. Later, Ricky claimed that he strangled Joseph, but the medical examiner found no injuries on Joseph consistent with trauma. Prison officials said they had no reason to believe that Ricky was involved in Joseph's death. For some reason, Ricky felt compelled to claim that he committed a murder that he did not commit. On December 31, 2024, Ricky's security classification was reduced from maximum security to close custody. This meant he was now allowed to mingle with other prisoners. It didn't take long for a disaster to strike. On April 4, 2025, at 7:15 a.m., staff in the Cimarron unit of the prison responded to an altercation between inmates near the dining area. 2 inmates, Thorne Harnage and Donald Lashley, were found dead. Later, an inmate named Saul Alvarez was found dead in his cell. Prison officials said that preliminary reports suggested that Ricky Wassenaar acted with intent to harm these 3 men. He was the sole suspect in their murders. At the time I'm making this video, the causes of the inmates' deaths have not been released, and the investigation is ongoing. Now moving to my analysis. The 3 murder victims were long-term guests of the prison complex in Tucson. Saul Alvarez had committed a murder in 1997 and was convicted of first-degree murder. His sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. Both Thorne Harnage and Donald Lashley were serving 35 years to life in prison for committing terrible offenses against minors. It seems reasonable to believe that Ricky is guilty of killing these 3 inmates, especially in light of his confession. From prison, Ricky gave a telephone interview to a reporter during which he accepted responsibility. Here is a summary of what Ricky said. Much of this is paraphrased. Ricky stated that all 3 of his victims had committed offenses against children. As far as the number of murders Ricky wanted to commit, the goal he had in mind was higher than 3. He said, quote, "My goal was at least 7, but I was hoping for a baker's dozen," unquote. A baker's dozen is 13, so Ricky was 10 homicides short of his mission. He was either bad at math or bad at murdering. Between the attack years earlier with a giant spatula and the mention of a baker's dozen, Ricky demonstrated an affinity for culinary-themed criminal behavior. Ricky talked about how he once believed he would be resentenced for the Lewis prison standoff, but that never happened. He realized he was never going to get out of prison. He said, quote, "I asked God, what is Plan B? And that's when Plan B came to me," unquote. Ricky felt justified in committing the murders. He believed he gave closure to all the victims of his victims. His behavior has now established a deterrent. People considering crimes like the ones his murder victims committed will see Ricky's behavior and decide against criminal activity. The reporter interviewing Ricky said, "Other people would also say, 'You just can't kill people.'" Ricky replied, "I can. Why can't I?" The reporter said, "Well, that's against the law too." Ricky responded, "No, it's not. It shouldn't be. I mean, yeah, it's against your law. That's society. You can't apply your societal rules into my world. We're in 2 separate worlds in here. Inside the razor wire, your society rules do not apply to us." Toward the end of the interview, the reporter asked, "Does that make you a monster?" Ricky claimed that he was a monster to terrible offenders. so he was their monster. During an interview with a different reporter, Ricky explained how Saul Alvarez was his cellmate. He said that he beat him to death with a rock because Saul was not a fan of Donald Trump. After this, he killed the other 2 inmates near the dining area using a shank. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. The director of the Department of Corrections in Arizona is a controversial figure who described himself as an innovative leader with a vision of reimagining corrections. Under pressure to reduce costs, he has moved many prisoners from maximum security to close security. As it turns out, the director isn't the only one reimagining the prison system to cut costs. Ricky had his own vision in this regard. Ricky's plan was a little more direct and driven by a shank-centric philosophy. He believed in cutting costs and cutting inmates. His policy was less red tape and more red blood. To be fair, by reducing the number of inmates, Ricky's plan definitely made the prison system cheaper to operate. In a strange way, the director's reimagination of the system is what allowed Ricky to implement his plan. When Ricky was moved from maximum security to close security, he realized he now had a chance to implement his own prison reform initiative. Unhappy about having a cellmate, Ricky murdered Saul Alvarez. Before anybody realized this, he murdered the other 2 inmates near the dining area. Maybe Ricky was desperate for attention. Perhaps he thought he could become a hero by killing inmates who many people in society will not miss. There's no way to know. One thing is for certain, however, Ricky is too dangerous to be allowed near any other inmates or anyone at all. He moves through the world like a man with nothing to lose. No hope, no fear of death, no room left for reason. His transformation is complete. The man who once dreamed of reforming the prison system has achieved a more homicidal version of his goal. Those are my thoughts on the case of Ricky Wassenaar. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. I think for some people, when they look at somebody like Ricky Wassenaar, they think, okay, that's a terrible guy. He's done a lot of terrible things. He should be in prison for life. But at the same time, when he murders other inmates, allegedly, they might think, well, those other inmates were terrible people, and they were supposed to be in prison for life or close to life, and now they're dead. But is that really a dramatic loss? They might think that Ricky's bad, the other people were bad, and whatever happens is what happens. As long as it doesn't spill over into the rest of society, let the people kind of fight it out in prison. I think it's a tough sell to ask taxpayers to give more money to make prisons safer when a lot of people probably don't really care if they're safer or not. Again, these deaths may not be considered tragic by many people. They might look at it like these individuals played a dangerous game and they ended up dead. Ricky may have actually done something that a lot of people support, even though they might not say it. They might not directly state they like what he did, but secretly, maybe they do. That's the strange position where Ricky finds himself. He will certainly be condemned by the system, but he won't be universally condemned by the public. At the same time, he is more or less forgotten. He's on the inside of a prison. He's never getting out. And no matter what he does, no matter how many people he kills, nothing's going to change that. His fate is sealed. Now he's trying desperately to win the attention and maybe the affection of the public, but this isn't going to work for Ricky. One could argue that prisoners are in a tough spot if they truly are trying to find ways to be pro-social. There isn't really a lot they can do to turn their lives around in prison. Like there's education groups and there's some other programs where they can like raise dogs and make products and things like that. But nobody really cares. Society isn't really interested in those people becoming reformed, especially the people who are sentenced to very long terms. So if a prisoner has a history of violence and they're looking for some way to turn their image around, they may start killing people who committed serious crimes. They may really believe that that will change the perception of the public. I don't know if that's what happened with Ricky. I have this sense that this really started when he lost his temper with Saul Alvarez. Like he killed him and kind of realized that he was already in trouble. Like it didn't really matter if he killed additional people. As he was thinking about it, he tried to create kind of a theme. So he killed Saul, then he decided to kill these other two to make it seem like that was his mission in the first place. He was trying to eradicate the bad people. Again, I think in reality, he was just trying to eradicate his cellmate. I think he came up with the other idea after that. Either way, no matter what Ricky was really trying to get, he's not going to get it. Just like his long and failed standoff from 2004, Ricky is not going to achieve his goals. When a person goes to prison for a long sentence, it's very hard for them to reinvent themselves. Ricky's alleged criminal behavior has brought attention to the plight faced by many prisoners. They feel abandoned by society. They feel like their lives don't matter anymore. For the 3 murder victims in this case, it really does seem that way. It seems like not many people really care what happened to them. Again, they might say things like, oh, that's terrible, but inside they really don't feel that way. Ricky has really touched on something important here. It is important to treat all prisoners humanely and to protect prisoners. These people were not sentenced to die, yet that is exactly the sentence they received.